Good afternoon, everyone. We are Team 10 consisting of Faith, Brian, Jaren, and Dominic, and today we will be answering the question, should women have more power? Before we dive into the questions, here is some background about women and power. Firstly, women tend to have less power than men. This is seen in how only 18.8% of Fortune 1000 companies and 20.6% of Fortune 500 companies' board seats were occupied by women. Also, 1 in 5 of the 3,000 largest companies in the US have no female board members. This highlights the discrimination and the glass ceiling that many women might face, and may also be bad for business. Why is the lack of women in companies bad for business? This is because diverse groups might be more creative and innovative, and decision-making is more accurate when a group has a variety of perspectives. Furthermore, having women on an executive board boosts returns, especially in countries with stronger shareholder protections. Lastly, having female board members helps companies' marketplace performance in countries with higher gender equality. However, some might argue that diverse executive boards are not always beneficial, as while having women with greater power on a board led to more strategic change in the organization, this is only true when the company is not threatened by low performance. So what are countries doing to help the situation? Many countries are trying to improve their economies by creating quotas that promote more gender-diverse boards. For example, as of 2008, Norway requires women to hold 36% of board seats. Non-compliance could lead to the dissolution of the company. France also passed a legislation in 2011 to promote gender-diverse boards, resulting in 48% of new directorships being held by women in 2013. Lastly, Belgium also passed a legislation in 2011 for women to hold 33% of board seats. Non-compliance could result in voiding the appointment of the directors or suspension of director benefits. Now we will answer the following questions. Firstly, why do you think having women with greater power on a board changes firm performance? Secondly, do you think using a quota system to promote gender diversity is a good idea? Why or why not? Lastly, why do you think some countries have more gender diverse boards than others?
On to the first question, why do you think having women with greater power on a board changes firm performance? To illustrate this point, let's look at several financial metrics published in a report by a leading bank. According to Credit Suisse, large cap companies with at least one woman on the board have outperformed their peer group with no women on the board by a staggering 26%. As seen from this table, we notice that companies with women on the board are generally better off. For instance, there is a lower gearing ratio which is attributed to the risk-averse nature of women when it comes on to taking debt. Also, we observe a 14% net income growth as compared to only 10% for companies without any female board directors. The above point is further substantiated by a research article by the Academy of Accounting and Financial Studies Journal. Upon investigating 89 publicly listed companies, it was revealed that there was a positive correlation between board diversity and firm performance. This is consistent with the agency theory, which suggests that female directors are more likely to deliver better monitoring function compared to male directors. The same article also talks about CSR, which also illustrates a positive correlation. These findings are consistent with the resource dependence theory, which states that employing female directors can advance firms' legitimacy and enables better capital inflows, investment opportunities, government backing, and community acceptance. This ultimately boils down to the concept of diversity, which is a strong driver of productivity. So, some general facts about diversity. The reason why non-diverse companies fail to do as well can be attributed to something called functional bias. This is a prevalent problem for teams facing new, uncertain, and complex situations. Because with little cognitive diversity, the team will have limited ability to see things differently, engage in different ways, or create new options. One thing we need to take note when we talk about diversity is the type of diversity. From what we have learned, surface level diversity does not mean much. What matters is cognitive diversity, which refers to the wide variety of ways employees think and solve problems. Men and women think and work differently, which contributes to cognitive diversity. Harvard Business Review conducted an execution problem set for companies' executives and found that groups with higher cognitive diversity were able to generate accelerated learning and performance in the face of new, uncertain, and complex situations as compared to homogeneous teams. Now, how does diversity play a role within companies? First, we note that companies with gender diverse boards generally have greater effort. Research shows that majority groups improve their own performance in response to minority involvement, which produces better average outcomes in more diverse environments. Second, there is a better mix of leadership skills. McKinsey, a top consulting firm along with NASA, conducted studies that reviewed the superior ability of women when it comes to defining responsibilities clearly. This helps to foster better balance in leadership skills within the company. Number 3. As the world becomes increasingly inclusive when it comes to gender, this opens up access to a wider talent pool. Globally, we see an increase in female graduates. Countries such as Panama, Argentina, and Brunei, just to name a few, have some of the highest female to male ratios in higher education. In Malaysia, more than 64% of university enrollments are females, a number which has increased consistently through the years. Hence, any company that manages to achieve gender diversity has this untapped opportunity to the widest possible pool of talent. Fourth, women are generally responsible for household spending decisions, and it goes without saying that a board with female representation enhances the understanding of consumer preferences and is a better reflection of their purchasing behavior. This is supported by the fact that consumer-facing industries already rank among those with the greater proportion of women on the board. Number 5. There is evidence of improved corporate governance as well. A report by MSCI revealed that gender-diverse boards face fewer governance-related controversies such as bribery, corruption, fraud, and shareholder matters. Lastly, given the risk-averse personalities of women, stocks of companies with women on the board are more likely to have lower levels of gearing than their peer groups. This ties in with the fact that lower relative debt levels have been a useful determinant of equity market outperformance.
Now, before we tackle the question, I would like to clarify it. The question is about promoting gender diversity rather than a means to achieve the end. There is no magic wand or one-size-fits-all policy that will help achieve gender diversity. We will need to understand the underlying reasons why they mainly hire from one group of gender, and it could be perhaps due to the perceived skill gap of the job, or the plain biasness of the company, and even cultural employment practices, case in point Japan. The employment quota effectiveness is likely to be dependent on the job, company, and society. We will discuss the two opposing views and our recommendations in the following slides. Anyone can see the obvious benefits of imposing a quota. Similar to the minimum wage policy, a gender quota can artificially fix the gender imbalance. This is especially useful in areas where women have to go an extra mile in order to get the same recognition. And gender quota can be the first step to correct such unfair advantages. Market forces will not fix the problem, as many companies have historical DNA where they like to hire male. An example of this would be in Denmark, where this topic has been heavily discussed but no legal action has been taken. Secondly, gender quota can help to enhance the organization's performance. Based on a Harvard Business Review, the results show that diversity has led to better financial results. It is also more useful in areas where there is a perceived skill gap against women, and this can incentivize companies to change their corporate culture and potentially create a pro-gender hiring policy which ties in with the business interests. Lastly, it can help to reduce the chilling effect. A large number of boards have little or no female representations, and this will create a chilling effect by discouraging or deterring other women to obtain positions of leadership or even trying for it. This could potentially streamline the hiring selection process when companies have to quantify the skills required rather than having a biased process that heavily relies on a social network and one that exhibits the gender lines. Now let's discuss the opposing views. The point of having a quota system is to eventually help solve gender inequality. A study in Europe, however, suggests that there may be a backlash. The better the achievements in terms of equality for women, the less support is given to a gender equality policy such as gender quota. As such, there is a need to look beyond policies such as the gender quota and towards more sustainable policies where we can look at employees' support and benefits. Secondly, there could be no adherence to such a quota system. Many nations do not impose financial penalties for non-compliance, and this includes Switzerland, which has passed a law in 2018 that requires board to be 30% female. There could be potential further drawbacks, where such programs designed to promote women eventually isolate them and prevent them from forming a broad internal relationships critical to success. In cases where there are no perceived bias against women in an industry, implementing a gender quota can damage the organization's performance and harm the people who are meant to benefit from the quota. Lastly, a quota system might not even be effective. In areas where there is an actual skill gap due to the job's nature, this may not promote gender diversity as the best candidates are men. An example of this would be jobs that require physical labor. If they are still to hire females, this may lead to hiring undeserving candidates because of the gender. And this could potentially further set back the push for gender diversity once there is an actual skill gap. In countries like Spain and Norway, female directors appointed after the quotas were introduced are less likely than their pre-quota counterparts to have some of the traits that are considered to make good directors. Post-quota employees are, for example, younger, have less experience as the chief executives, and are less likely to be business owners or entrepreneurs. This quota system can also potentially become a ceiling rather than a flaw. Now let me bring you back to the question about gender diversity and whether having a quota system will help to actually promote it. We believe that while a quota system might be too simplistic in that manner, it is absolutely necessary. Quotas will help to overcome job, industrial, and cultural norms. Together with more sustainable policies, it will form a broader and more comprehensive approach. In the future, quotas can be lifted in accordance with the principle of equal treatment to prevent the backlash. Having discussed the shortcomings in the earlier slides, our group has the following recommendations in order to allow gender quota to be an effective measure. Our group believes that education is very important and we need to build up a strong corporate culture that values diversity so that quota will be well received. If an organization wants to impose gender quotas, they will first have to educate their employees whether there is any gender skill gap and whether it is justified in the first place. They could also emphasize the strengths and talents of employees and help to dismiss any perceived gaps. Secondly, powerful legislation can take the first step in order for quota to be effective. Thirdly, the quota system should not be raw numbers, but instead should be percentage, where it is a percentage of men and women, and so as to adequately distribute the labor force. Ultimately, a strong corporate culture will recognize the strengths and talents of individual employees, ensuring that everyone can contribute their maximum and producing a win-win situation for the company and employee.
Moving on, I will now cover why some countries have more gender diverse corporate and executive boards compared to others. As this was covered earlier, I will go through this quickly. Generally speaking, globally, women are largely unrepresented or lowly represented on corporate and executive boards. According to the Global Board Diversity Analysis, 77% of countries globally do not have at least 3 women on their executive boards. However, with the implementation of gender quotas, female representation on executive boards have increased greatly. In Italy, it has increased from 8% to 32%, France from 21% to 38%, Norway increased to 27%, and Sweden increased to 29%. Next, traditionalistic cultures and societies have preconceived notions that have been passed down through generations, and people who live in these societies follow these practices. For example, in Asian cultures where men are usually the sole breadwinners and females are entrusted with taking care of the household and children. Furthermore, in some societies, women are not recognized to be of an equal status to men. As a result, in such countries and societies, women's opportunities for progression can be rarely compared to men. They are also discriminated at their workplace because of their gender, which is deemed to be of a lower status due to the society and culture they live in. As a result, in these societies and cultures, there will be more men on corporate and executive boards. Next, I will explain what does homogeneity spurs homogeneity, diversity spurs diversity mean. This point is akin to how humans naturally work and process. In that sense, humans relate better and form bonds with people who are similar to them as it gives them the endearing feeling of familiarity. However, globally, women only hold 4.4% of CEO positions and 12.7% of CFO positions. These positions are the ones who generally make the decision on who ends up on the corporate executive board. Thus, with so little females in these positions, without a doubt we can see that similarly females are largely unrepresented or hold very few positions on corporate and executive boards globally. Organizations with women in C-suite positions also have almost double the number of women on corporate and executive boards as compared to those that do not. Furthermore, it can be reasoned that if a company is willing to appoint a female as their CEO or CFO, they will be willing to appoint a female on the executive board, and this given that she has the appropriate and proven credentials. Next, women find it difficult to progress in the corporate world due to their personal commitments. The corporate world and your career progression is judged based on your contribution at your workplace. However, women are limited by the fact that they might have children and start a family. In that case, she have to take the maternity leave and thereafter parental leave. This leaves females at a disadvantage as they have to leave their workplace for a prolonged period of time. There is a saying, choose your job or choose your family. There are many companies today that still do not provide benefits such as maternity leave for their female staff and lack programs to help reintegrate these women back into the corporate world upon their return from a career gap. Thus, many women who eventually make it the C-suite of executive boards are not married and do not have children. Lastly, this can be explained by Hofstede's cultural dimensions, which can be found in the textbook. Generally, societies that exhibit a higher power distance value are expected to show a lower level of female representation on corporate executive boards. Countries with lower levels of uncertainty avoidance are more tolerant to opinions and open to risk. Thus, they are more willing to change and adapt to new schools of thought and realities. As such, they will be more open to having women on their corporate and executive boards. In these societies, there will be more women represented on corporate and executive boards. Individualistic societies value working alone, and thus you will see less women being represented on corporate and executive boards. Vice versa for collective societies. Lastly, countries with societies that value masculinity highly also do not bode well for female representation on corporate and executive boards. Short-term oriented societies are focused on present situations and value tradition, and as mentioned previously, this will lead to a lack of female representation on corporate and executive boards.